What if I told you that one night, at an airport in a small African nation, 17 suitcases were opened? And their contents had the power not just to overthrow a government, but to wipe an entire nation off the map? This is not a story about money. Or rather, not just about money. This is a story about what was lying next to the millions of euros. It's about poisons designed to simulate a heart attack. About secret lists with the names of people marked for elimination. About a detailed report on the assassination of a national hero 36 years ago. And a plan to repeat that murder with the new president. That night, one young leader faced a choice: surrender and save his own life, or open all 17 suitcases, live on television for the entire world to see, and start a war with an enemy that had considered his country its private property for decades. What you are about to see is not just a political scandal. It is the script for the single most audacious act of defiance in the 21st century. Watch until the end to discover what was hidden inside the final, most terrifying, 17th suitcase, and how opening it changed the destiny of an entire continent forever. For more stories like this that the mainstream media won't tell you, make sure to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Midnight. A thick, viscous silence hangs over the Ouagadougou International Airport. But this was not the peaceful, sleepy silence common to air terminals at such a late hour. Normally at this time, one would only find drowsy guards making their rounds, one or two janitors lazily pushing their carts, and a handful of exhausted passengers waiting for a delayed flight. But this night was different. This silence was heavy, electrified, like the calm before a devastating storm. Every corner of the airport was under the control of Ibrahim Traoré's special forces. Soldiers in red berets, silent shadows with their weapons at the ready, had taken up all strategic positions. Their silhouettes were stark against the starry African sky. On the runway, isolated from the world, sat a French diplomatic plane. Its engines hummed impatiently, ready to whisk the craft into the night sky at any moment, and the pilot was still awaiting clearance for takeoff. But he did not know that this clearance would never come. Around the plane, armored vehicles were positioned like steel predators, blocking any possible route of escape. The epicenter of this tension was in the VIP lounge. Its windows were fogged from the contrast between the cold of the night outside and the heat of human emotion within. Gathered around a long, polished table was the full assembly of Burkina Faso's new leadership. At its head sat the young leader himself, Ibrahim Traoré. Beside him were the Chief of Intelligence, Colonel Madou Kabor, the Airport Director, Ousmane Dio, and the Minister of Justice, Aminata Traoré. But the main actor in this nocturnal drama was, without a doubt, the French ambassador, Jacques Dubois. Beads of sweat trickled down his forehead, leaving dark tracks on the collar of his expensive suit, which now seemed rumpled and soaked. His hands trembled slightly, and he kept shifting his position, trying in vain to hide his condition. "Mr. President," he began, struggling to control a voice that was betraying him, "this must be some kind of misunderstanding. Diplomatic immunity, under international law." Traoré raised a hand, and the ambassador fell silent as if he had run into an invisible wall. There was no anger in the young leader's eyes. There was something worse, a deep, cold disappointment. "Immunity, Mr. Ambassador?" His voice was calm, but in that silence, it sounded like a verdict. Immunity is not a shield to be used while stealing our country's wealth. A diplomatic passport does not grant the right to commit theft. Colonel Kabor, the intelligence chief, opened the thick file lying on the table. He pulled out photographs taken by the airport's security cameras. 2247, he began to read in a monotone, 3 vehicles from the French embassy enter the airport grounds. 2315, these 17 suitcases are loaded onto the plane. 2338, you arrive at the VIP lounge. 2345, the plane requests clearance for takeoff. This is diplomatic cargo. Dubois protested, grasping at his last straw. According to the Vienna Convention, Justice Minister Aminata interrupted, also states that diplomatic cargo must not contain weapons, drugs, or illegal materials. What is in these suitcases, Mr. Ambassador? Dubois fell silent. His eyes darted toward the door, searching for a route of escape. But 2 soldiers stood at the door, as motionless as statues. There was no escape. Ibrahim Traoré spoke a single word, but its weight seemed to fill the entire room, pressing out the remaining air. Open. Two soldiers lifted the first suitcase and hoisted it onto the table. All eyes were fixed on the black, sturdy case with its diplomatic seals, which now lay at the center of their world like a time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. The two soldiers moved with practiced efficiency. The metallic click of the latches on the first suitcase echoed unnaturally loud in the silent room. Every eye was fixed on it, this black, sturdy case that had become the focal point of a nation's destiny. Colonel Kabor leaned in, photographing each diplomatic seal before breaking it. Evidence, he stated, his voice flat and professional. So no one can deny what we find here. The lid was raised slowly, deliberately. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, the airport director, Dio, let out an involuntary whistle. My God, he murmured, his voice a mix of awe and disgust. The suitcase was filled to the brim with money. Stacks of crisp euro banknotes, arranged in perfect, neat rows, each wrapped in bands bearing the official seal of the French central bank. Kabor, pulling on a pair of white gloves, lifted one stack. 100 euro notes, he announced, his fingers quickly flicking through them. 10,000 euros in each stack. The total is exactly 1 million euros. The sheer audacity of it hung in the air. 1 million euros, packed like common cargo. But Traoré's gaze was fixed on the suitcase. That's not all, he said. He pointed to a side compartment. Kabor opened it, and this time, the contents were even more damning. Gleaming softly under the harsh lights of the lounge were gold bars. Each one was small, heavy, and stamped with a distinctive mark, the official seal of the mines of Burkina Faso. This is our gold, Traoré said, his voice low but vibrating with intensity. Gold from our country's mines. The product of our people's labor, stolen before it ever had a chance to serve them. Ambassador Dubois' face had turned a sickly, ashen color. I don't know anything about this, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room for a sympathetic face and finding none. This must be the work of embassy personnel acting on their own initiative. Don't lie. Aminata, the justice minister, snapped, her voice like the crack of a whip. She snatched one of the bars. Look, each bar has a date stamped on it. All of them were extracted within the last month. The export records exist, but who received the payment? You? The onslaught had just begun. The seventh suitcase was opened. This one was a bribery fund, a multinational currency buffet. US dollars, British pounds, even Chinese yuan, ready to pay off anyone in their preferred currency. The eighth suitcase revealed a more insidious form of corruption. It was filled with luxury items, expensive Swiss watches, diamond necklaces, the latest electronic gadgets. Attached to each was a small, elegantly written card. Kabor picked one up and read aloud. For General Kaifando's valued wife. Here's another. A small graduation gift for Governor Zongrana's son. Aminata shook her head in disgust. They're buying the families, too. Not just the officials but their wives, their children. Rotting the entire tree from the roots up. The room was filled with the tangible proof of a nation being sold off piece by piece. The scale of the financial plunder was staggering. It was a scandal that could topple governments, a crime that cried out for justice. For a moment, it seemed like this was the climax of the night's drama. But as his team catalogued the piles of cash and luxury goods, Ibrahim Traoré remained unnervingly calm. He looked over the treasure trove of corruption, his expression almost dismissive. His eyes weren't on the gold, but on the remaining 16 suitcases, still sealed, still silent. He turned his gaze back to the pale-faced ambassador. This, Traoré said, his voice cutting through the tense silence, is just the beginning. The air in the room, already thick with the scent of betrayal, grew heavier still. Traoré's words, this is just the beginning, had shifted the focus from mere theft to something far more sinister. If 1 million euros in bars of gold were just the opening act, what could possibly constitute the main event? The answer came with the opening of the second suitcase. There was no money inside. Instead, it was packed with hundreds of pages of official-looking documents. Colonel Kabor handled them with a reverence reserved for holy relics, using a small UV light to inspect the watermarks. These are originals, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Not photocopies. Original state documents. Traoré began to examine the pages, his face growing more serious with each one he read. Mining maps, he said, spreading one across the table. Gold reserves not yet announced to the public. Uranium deposits. He paused, his finger tracing a line on a geological survey. Even our newly discovered oil fields. The revelation struck the room like a physical blow. This was not about stealing past profits, it was about stealing the entire future of Burkina Faso. This information is ultra-secret, Kabore stated, his mind racing. Only 5 people in the entire country are supposed to know about this. You, me, the energy minister, the chief of staff, and... He trailed off, his eyes scanning a list attached to the documents. Traoré finished his sentence for him, his voice cold as ice. And the director of geology, Pascal Orago. So, he has been bought. How valuable is this information? Asked the airport director, his voice barely a whisper. Aminata answered, her tone grim. If foreign companies learn this in advance, they can position themselves before any public tenders are announced. They can buy up the land cheaply. They can make deals with local shell companies. They can gain billions of dollars in advantage. They can own our resources before we even know we have them. But the conspiracy went deeper. The third suitcase was opened, and it contained no documents, only photographs. Hundreds of them. Kabore began to spread them across the polished table like a deck of cursed cards. Each one told a story of compromise and corruption. Minister Sawadogo at a nightclub in Paris, he said, holding up the first photo. And look who is with him. French arms dealers. He picked up another. General Kouame at a bank in Geneva. What is that in his hand? A briefcase full of cash. Another photo showed Governor Zongrana's wife on a lavish shopping spree in Paris, the bill being paid by a representative of a French mining company. It was a professional surveillance and blackmail operation, meticulously documented with dates, times, and locations. They weren't just bribing officials, they were ensnaring them in a web of disgrace, ensuring their absolute obedience. The fourth suitcase revealed the tools of this insidious trade. When the lid was opened, Kabore took a step back. Weapons, he said, but of a different kind. Be careful. The case was full of state-of-the-art spy equipment. Listening devices of all sizes, some no bigger than a grain of rice. Camera systems so small they could be hidden inside a shirt button. Drones the size of a bird. Signal jammers. This isn't ordinary equipment, Kabore said, examining a small device. Look, it has the NSA logo. This is American intelligence equipment. How did it get to France? NATO, Traoré replied without hesitation. Technology sharing among allies. But the intended place of use is the independent nations of Africa. Then came the fifth suitcase. It contained the human element of the operation. Dozens of fake identities, passports, driver's licenses, and diplomatic cards, all flawlessly forged. They bore different names from different countries, but the photos often belonged to the same handful of people. I recognize this face, said the airport director, holding up a passport. He came last month, posing as a human rights observer. Aminata picked up another ID. And this one was with us just last week. A journalist. He interviewed Minister Sawadogo. Same person, Kabore confirmed, but 3 different identities. A spy network, hiding in plain sight. Traoré stood up and walked to the window, his back to the room. He looked out at the French plane, still waiting silently on the runway, a monument to a game he was only now beginning to fully understand. He turned his head slightly, his gaze directed at the defeated ambassador. How many years, he asked, his voice low and dangerous, have you been playing this game? Ambassador Dubois continued his silence, a statue of guilt. But the suitcases kept revealing their secrets, each one peeling back another layer of the conspiracy. Traoré's question, how many years, was answered by the contents of the 6th suitcase. When Kabore opened it, his face went pale with shock. This is from the General Staff's safe, he stammered, his hands trembling as he lifted a stack of documents. Deployment plans, weapons inventories, personnel lists, our army's most secret information, its weak points. The room fell into a stunned silence. This was no longer just about economic plunder or political blackmail. This was military espionage of the highest order. This was the blueprint for an invasion. Only 3 people have access to that safe, Kabore said, his mind reeling. 4, Traoré corrected him grimly. You forgot about the cleaning lady, Mariam. She's been working in the General Staff building for 20 years. No one pays any attention to her. But she sees everything. She hears everything. Mariam? Kabore couldn't believe it. That frail old woman? Never be fooled by appearances, Colonel, Traoré said. The best spies are always the ones who arouse the least suspicion. The treachery was everywhere, reaching from the highest echelons of power down to the most seemingly insignificant positions. It was a cancer that had metastasized throughout the entire state. But the next discovery would prove to be the most personal and chilling of all. When the ninth suitcase was opened, Kabor dropped the papers he was holding. This is impossible. Inside were documents related to Ibrahim Traoré's private life, photographs of his family, audio recordings of his private conversations, even his medical reports. Traoré himself walked over and picked up a file. My last checkup results, he said, his voice dangerously calm. Only my doctor and I knew about this. Look at this, Kabor said, holding up another document with a look of horror. These are transcripts of our private security meetings. Word for word. Traoré examined the document. The date, last Tuesday. The time, 3 p.m. The location, the secure room in the palace. The subject, the closure of French military bases. We swept that room for bugs, Kabor insisted, his voice laced with desperation. We sweep it every day. It's impossible for there to be a listening device. Perhaps there is no device, Traoré said, his eyes scanning the list of participants. A cold realization dawned on him. But there is a person. Everyone in the room looked at each other. Only 3 people had been in that secure room for that meeting: Traoré, Kabor, and the defense minister. All 3 of them. No, wait. The defense minister, Kabor said slowly, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. He didn't come to that meeting. He called in sick. No, Traoré corrected him. He came, but only for 5 minutes. He said he had to take an urgent call and left. Do you remember? Kabor remembered. Yes. Something about an arms shipment. From France. From France, Traoré repeated, letting the words hang in the air. What a coincidence. The enemy wasn't just at the gates. The enemy was inside the room, sharing their table, breathing their air. The network of traitors was deeper and more intimate than any of them could have possibly imagined. The blackmail photos of greedy ministers were one thing. This was a betrayal by someone they had trusted with their lives and the nation's security. Traoré felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He was surrounded. He was fighting a war on 2 fronts. Against a powerful foreign adversary, and against the vipers he had unknowingly harbored in his own nest. The ambassador watched him, a faint, desperate hope flickering in his eyes. Perhaps this revelation would break the young leader. Perhaps the knowledge that he was utterly alone would make him back down. But as Traoré looked up from the transcripts of his own secret meetings, there was no fear in his eyes. Only a new, harder resolve. The game had changed. It was no longer about exposing a crime. It was about survival. The night deepened, but the revelations became ever clearer, ever more horrifying. The contents of the next suitcases laid bare the endgame of the entire conspiracy. The 11th suitcase contained professionally produced propaganda materials, posters, brochures, and slick videos announcing a new future for Burkina Faso. The face of this new future was a man Traoré knew well, General Laurent Compaoré. Compaoré? Traoré said, his voice thoughtful. We all thought he died in the 2019 coup attempt. Apparently, he is alive, Kabor said grimly, and the French have been hiding him, preparing him to be their puppet. The videos were clearly filmed in Paris. The top of the Eiffel Tower was visible in the background. They had a replacement leader waiting in the wings, ready to be installed the moment Traoré was removed. The 12th suitcase revealed the method of that removal. It was an assassination kit. Small bottles filled with colorless, odorless poisons. Powders and capsules designed to mimic a heart attack, a stroke, or a simple case of food poisoning, leaving no trace. Who were you going to kill with these, Ambassador? Traoré asked, his voice dangerously soft. Dubois finally broke his silence, his voice a desperate plea. I am just a courier. I swear, I don't know what these are. You don't know, Traoré shot back, but security cameras show you loading 17 suitcases onto that plane yourself. The 13th and 14th suitcases exposed the plan for total digital and economic subjugation. They contained hard drives that held a complete copy of Burkina Faso's entire digital infrastructure, government systems, banking networks, telecommunications, even the power grid. A cyber warfare weapon that could paralyze the entire country with a single keystroke. They also held draft contracts for the nation's newly discovered oil, giving a French company 80% of all revenue for the next 50 years. At the bottom of the contract was a perfect forgery of Ibrahim Traoré's signature, ready to legitimize the theft after he was gone. Then came the 15th suitcase. It was filled with lists of names. Thousands of them. Students, teachers, journalists, union leaders, artists. A threat list, Traoré said, his face dark as he scanned the pages. Everyone who might oppose the new regime. Next to each name was a code. K. To be imprisoned. T. To be arrested. S. To be exiled. And O. How many have an O next to their name? Kabor asked, dreading the answer. Aminata counted silently. 47 people, she said, her voice trembling. Including journalists, judges, opposition leaders, and me. And me, said Traoré, pointing to his own name at the very top of the list. The 16th suitcase contained the invasion plan. High-resolution military satellite images of every corner of the country, marking every military base, every weapons depot, every fuel tank. Everything was ready. They were just waiting for the order. Finally, only one suitcase remained. The 17th. Before opening it, Traoré took a deep breath. This is the last one, he said. Let's see what final surprise it holds. When the suitcase was opened, it contained only a single, thick, black-covered file. Written on it in gold letters were two words: Operation Sankara. Traoré's hands trembled slightly as he took the file. Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's legendary, revolutionary leader, had been assassinated in 1987. Now, 36 years later. He opened the first page. At the top was the date, October 15, 1987. The day Sankara was killed. Objective. He began reading aloud. Elimination of Thomas Sankara and installation of a pro-Western government. Participants. French Secret Service, DGSE, CIA liaison officer, Blaise Compaoré, and 12 Burkinabe officers. Result. Operation successful. French interests secured. The room was utterly silent. Everyone held their breath. Traoré turned the pages. There were graphic photos of Sankara's body. Then he reached the final pages. And look, he said, his voice cracking with a mix of fury and sorrow. Operation Sankara. Phase 2. Date: 2023-2024. Target: Ibrahim Traoré. Objective: elimination of Traoré, who continues Sankara's legacy. The entire plot was laid bare. It wasn't just a plan, it was history repeating itself. The same methods, the same killers, the same goal. He closed the file, his face an expressionless mask hiding a deep well of pain. 36 years, he whispered. And they're trying to do it again. The ambassador, seeing his entire world crumble, stood up. I swear, I did not know about this. Only the suitcases. Be quiet, Traoré commanded. It is no longer time to talk. The puzzle was complete. The evidence was irrefutable. But knowledge was not power. He was a marked man, the leader of a nation targeted for destruction, surrounded by traitors, and facing an enemy that would stop at nothing. The plan against him was already in motion. He was holding the script to his own murder. For a long moment, the only sound in the VIP lounge was the hum of the air conditioning. The French ambassador, a broken man, had collapsed back into his chair. Traoré's team looked to their leader, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and righteous fury. They were waiting for his command. Would he order the ambassador's arrest? Would he start a quiet, internal purge? Would he try to negotiate from this position of damning knowledge? Traoré did none of those things. He looked at the faces of his trusted few, then at the mountain of evidence that represented decades of his country's suffering. He knew that a quiet response was what his enemies expected. A secret purge would be dismissed as a dictator consolidating power. An arrest would be spun as a violation of diplomatic norms. They had laid a trap, and any conventional move he made would spring it. So, he chose the unconventional. He chose the one weapon they did not account for: the truth. Not whispered in back rooms, but shouted from the rooftops. Colonel, he said, his voice ringing with newfound authority, everyone on this list of 17 names is to be arrested immediately. Search their homes, their offices. Seize all their assets. Yes, sir, Kabor replied, his shock replaced by grim determination. Aminata, Traoré continued, turning to his justice minister, call for an extraordinary session of parliament tomorrow morning. These documents will be shown to every representative. The people will learn everything. Understood, Mr. President. Dio, he looked at the airport director, the airport remains closed. No flights in or out. No one enters, no one leaves. As you command. Finally, he turned to the ghost white ambassador. And you, ambassador, I will give you one chance. Just one. A flicker of desperate hope returned to Dubois' eyes. You will return to Paris. But you will not go alone. You will be my messenger. You will deliver copies of the contents of these 17 suitcases. Every document, every photograph, every recording. Traoré walked towards the window. Outside, the first hint of dawn was breaking, painting the African horizon in shades of orange and pink. You will deliver a message, he said, his back to the room. Tell them that Burkina Faso is no longer a colony. Our gold, our uranium, our oil, it is ours. You cannot buy our people with blackmail, and you cannot control them with threats. You killed Thomas Sankara, but you could not kill his ideas. He turned to face Dubois, his eyes burning with the fire of a nation's resolve. And tell Laurent Compaoré and his friends in Paris, let them come. We are ready for them. But this time, the result will be different. At 6 a.m., Burkina Faso's national television broadcast was interrupted. The screen went dark, then lit up with the face of Ibrahim Traoré. He sat at a simple desk. Behind him, stacked for all to see, were 17 suitcases. My dear citizens, he began, his voice steady and strong, tonight, we witnessed one of the most important events in our history. 17 suitcases were seized at our airport. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I am now going to share their contents with you. For the next 2 hours, live and unedited, Ibrahim Traoré walked his nation through the anatomy of its own betrayal. He showed them the money. He showed them the gold. He showed them the secret maps, the blackmail photos, the spy equipment, the assassination poisons, the lists of traitors. He held up the file for Operation Sankara for the cameras to see. He hid nothing. He revealed everything. It was the most audacious, transparent, and dangerous political act imaginable. He was arming 22 million people with the truth. 17 suitcases, he said in conclusion, his gaze fixed on the camera, speaking to every man, woman, and child. 17 million euros. 17 traitors. But we are 22 million Burkinabe. And now, we are awake. When the broadcast ended, a strange silence fell over the capital city of Ouagadougou. It lasted for a minute. Then 2. And then, a sound began to rise. It started as a murmur, then grew into a roar. The people were pouring out of their homes and onto the streets. They carried flags, homemade banners, and portraits of Thomas Sankara. The cry echoed through the city, long live independence. Down with colonialism. Sankara's children are awakening. The truth had been unleashed, and it was more powerful than any army. In Paris, the reaction was one of stunned disbelief followed by pure fury. Crisis meetings were convened at the Élysée Palace. This is unacceptable. An outrage. The French president raged. He seized a diplomatic pouch and humiliated us on the world stage. We must intervene immediately. The defense minister agreed, advocating for a swift military response to restore order. But the foreign minister, a more cautious and seasoned diplomat, urged restraint. Mr. President, he warned, the entire world is watching. The evidence he presented is very clear. If we intervene now, we will be seen as colonial aggressors trying to silence the truth. We will lose all of Africa, not just Burkina Faso. So what do? Nothing, shouted the defense minister. We will wait, an old diplomat advised. And we will hope that other African countries do not get the same idea. But it was already too late. What happened in Ouagadougou did not stay in Ouagadougou. Ibrahim Traoré's courage had created a domino effect. In neighboring Mali, President Assimi Goïta called an emergency meeting of his cabinet. All contracts with French companies will be immediately reviewed, he announced publicly. And from now on, strict inspections will begin at our airports. In Niger, thousands of young people, inspired by the broadcast they had watched on their phones, took to the streets of Niamey. They chanted, "We want our 17 suitcases too. Our uranium is ours." Similar movements began to stir in Guinea, Senegal, and the Ivory Coast. Africa's young leaders, a new generation weary of the old games, were galvanized by Traoré's defiance. He had given them a new playbook. The battle quickly moved to the global stage. An emergency session of the United Nations Security Council was called. The French representative took the floor, his speech a carefully worded condemnation of Traoré's actions. "This is a flagrant violation of diplomatic immunity," he declared. "It is a dangerous precedent that undermines the very foundations of international law." When he finished, the representative from Burkina Faso stood up. He was a young diplomat, handpicked by Traoré, and he carried a set of files in his hand. He walked to the podium and looked directly at the French representative. "Mr. President," he began, his voice calm but firm, "my colleague speaks of international law. So let me ask, what does international law say about stealing the sovereign resources of another country? What does it say about controlling their leaders with blackmail? What does it say," he paused, letting the question hang in the silent hall, "about assassinating a head of state like Thomas Sankara?" Silence. The French representative had no answer. "Here is the evidence," the Burkinabe representative said, placing the files, copies of the contents of the 17 suitcases, on the table in the center of the room. "Let everyone see. Let everyone know the truth." The council was thrown into disarray. The Chinese representative took the floor. "We fully support Burkina Faso's sovereign rights and their fight against foreign interference." The Russian representative was next. "The age of colonialism has ended. Those who refuse to accept this reality will be left behind by history." The American representative remained silent, caught in a diplomatic vice, unable to openly support France's blatant neocolonialism but unwilling to alienate a key NATO ally. Strategic ambiguity was their only refuge. That evening, the streets of Ouagadougou were alive with celebration. Bonfires were lit in the city squares. Drums beat out rhythms of freedom, and songs of independence filled the air. An old man, tears streaming down his face, clutched a faded photograph of Thomas Sankara. "We waited 36 years, he wept. 36 years. But finally, justice has been served." Traoré had not just won a battle at home. He had ignited a firestorm on the world stage and exposed the rot at the heart of the old world order. But he knew this was just the beginning. The wounded empire would surely strike back. Humiliated on the global stage and facing a continental wave of anti-French sentiment, Paris knew a direct military intervention was now impossible. They had to change tactics. A week later, a surprise delegation arrived in Ouagadougou. It was led not by a politician, but by an old, aristocratic diplomat named Pierre Faucart, the grandson of the infamous Jacques Faucart, the architect of France's post-colonial web of influence in Africa. The symbolism was potent. The grandson had been sent to undo the work of the grandfather. "We want to talk," Faucart said upon meeting Traoré. "We want to open a new page." Traoré agreed to the talks, but on his own terms. "There will be conditions," he stated plainly. "First, the negotiations will be broadcast live on national television. My people will see and hear everything. There will be no more secret deals." Faucart, having no other choice, had to accept. The scene was historic. The young African leader, son of a revolution, sat opposite the old French diplomat, the scion of a colonial dynasty, with the entire nation as witness. Traoré took the first word. "Before we discuss the future, we must first face the past. You had Thomas Sankara killed. Do you admit it?" The question was a thunderclap. Faucart was silent for a long, agonizing moment. The cameras were rolling. A nation held its breath. "In the past," he finally said, choosing his words with immense care, "mistakes were made." "Mistakes?" Traoré's voice rose, sharp and accusatory. "Is murdering a nation's legitimate leader a mistake?" The pressure was immense. Faucart conferred with his aides, then looked back at Traoré. "Yes," he conceded, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "France played a role. We are sorry." The confession, broadcast live, was a political earthquake. For the first time, the truth was officially acknowledged. "Good," Traoré said, pressing his advantage. "Now, let's look to the future. Burkina Faso is a sovereign country. Our resources are ours. Do you accept this?" "Yes," Faucart said. "We accept. All current mining contracts will be cancelled. New ones will be negotiated under fair conditions. Do you accept?" "We can discuss the terms," Faucart countered. "No," Traoré said firmly. "There is no discussion. Do you accept?" Faucart made a frantic call to Paris. After a tense, lengthy conversation, he returned to the table. "We accept." And finally, Traoré delivered the final blow: "Your military bases will be closed. Your soldiers will leave our country. This is unacceptable. Foucault protested, his composure finally breaking. Our strategic interests. Then the talks are over, Traoré said, standing up as if to leave. Wait, Foucault cried out. He made another call. The silence in the room was deafening. He returned, his face pale, his shoulders slumped in defeat. We accept. A historic agreement was signed. On paper, Burkina Faso had achieved full independence. But Traoré knew his enemies would not give up so easily. He had won the diplomatic war, but a final, violent test was inevitable. It came 1 month later. Laurent Compaoré, the puppet general who was to have been installed as the new leader, attempted to cross the border into Burkina Faso. With him were 200 heavily armed mercenaries. Their goal was simple: stage a swift coup, capture and kill Traoré, and reverse everything. But Traoré was prepared. His intelligence network, rebuilt from the ground up, had reported Compaoré's every move. An ambush was laid at the border. The clash was brief and bloody. The mercenaries, caught completely by surprise, were routed and surrendered. Laurent Compaoré himself was captured alive. In a public trial, Compaoré confessed everything. France gave us the money, he said, a broken man. They gave us the weapons. They promised us air support. But they lied. When the ambush happened, they left me all alone. The last desperate gambit had failed. Traoré had outmaneuvered his enemies at every turn, diplomatically, politically, and now militarily. The war for Burkina Faso was over. The hard part, building a nation, was about to begin. 6 months after the night of the 17 suitcases, the world began to talk about the Burkina Faso miracle. The reports were astonishing. After decades of stagnation and debt, the nation's economy was showing unexpected, explosive growth. The reason was simple. For the first time in its history, the revenue from its gold exports was not flowing into foreign bank accounts, but into the national treasury. The change was immediate and tangible. In every village, a new school was being built. In every urban neighborhood, a new health clinic was opening its doors. Massive agricultural projects were launched to ensure food security, and state-sponsored programs created job opportunities for the thousands of unemployed youth who had once seen migration as their only hope. The international press was amazed. Journalists who came expecting to find a failed state run by a military dictator instead found a nation humming with activity and a palpable sense of optimism. In a speech, Traoré addressed the miracle narrative head-on. There is no miracle, he told a cheering crowd. We are simply using our own resources to serve our own people. It is that simple. The 17 suitcases themselves were moved to a new museum, established in the capital and named the Museum of National Independence. They became the central exhibit, a stark, physical reminder of the past and a symbol of the future. Hundreds of visitors came every day. Schools organized trips for their students. An old teacher stood before the glass display cases, explaining to a group of wide-eyed children. Here, children, he said, his voice thick with emotion. In these suitcases was our country's stolen future. But our president, our people, we took it back. A little girl raised her hand. Teacher, she asked, will the French come again? The teacher smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile. Even if they come, my child, he said, we are awake now. We will not sleep again. And indeed, it seemed that Burkina Faso would never sleep again. The 17 suitcases had become more than just a collection of money and documents. They were a national symbol of awakening, of resistance, and of victory. Years later, history books would write about the 17 suitcases incident as the true beginning of Africa's second independence movement. The first independence, they wrote, was political, granting flags and anthems. The second, sparked in a VIP lounge on a starry night, was economic. And this time, it was real. Ibrahim Traoré went down in history as the leader who opened the 17 suitcases. But he always remained humble. I only opened the cases, he would often say. The real work was done by my people. They are the ones who woke up. They are the ones who claimed what was theirs. The victory belongs to them. Burkina Faso, once again, lived up to its name, land of upright people. The story that began with 17 suitcases, 17 million euros, and 17 traitors ended with one undeniable truth: freedom. On that fateful night at the airport, it was not just suitcases that were opened. The eyes of a nation were opened. And they would never, ever close again. The last word belonged to a little girl, looking at the suitcases in the museum. She turned to her mother and asked, her voice filled with a child's simple, profound clarity, "Mommy, is our gold ours now?" Her mother knelt down, looked her in the eye, and smiled. "Yes, my daughter," she said, her voice full of a promise that had been 36 years in the making. "It is ours now. Forever." And the little girl smiled because she knew, with the certainty only a child can possess, that she now had a future. A real future. A free future. A future opened by 17 suitcases.